Hey guys, Prowl 1701 here. Today we're going to be talking about the Target novelization of The Massacre. Now, I have never seen The Massacre. It's one of the 4 classic Doctor Who stories I haven't seen yet. But I did want to read this, partially because I remember somebody in the comments saying that the novelization of The Massacre is very different from the televised episode, because the person who wrote the novelization is also the person who wrote the original script, but the script was heavily rewritten by the editor, Donald Tosh. After reading this, I did go look that up to confirm it, and Donald Tosh did, I think that was his name, did change a lot. Part of that was because William Hartnell is on holiday in episode 2, so they had to rewrite to cover that. And then I think Tosh wanted whether or not you're seeing the Abbot or the Doctor disguised as the Abbot to be a bit ambiguous, whereas the original version, you knew the audience is in on which one's the Abbot, which one's the Doctor pretending to be the Abbot. And the novelization is very up on that, too. I think there was only one point in the novelization where I was like, oh, wait, that's the Doctor, isn't it? Other than that, I knew who was who. And I'll be honest, I prefer that. This was really good, by the way, I have to say. This is one of the best novelizations I've read, right up there with the Highlanders. And I love the Highlanders, the TV version and the novelization. The Abominable Snowmen as well. This was a really good read. I see why Tedious Milkshake keeps hammering at me to watch The Massacre. I know he loves that one, because this was a great read. I could picture everything going on in my head. It's so descriptive. It's written so well. And I was easily able to picture the Doctor reacting the way I'm pretty sure Hartnell would react, the way he would say lines, what his body language would be. Because the first Doctor has so many mannerisms, the way he flutters his hands, his, his little laugh, his little, I wonder, the way he holds his, kind of sometimes doing his hands like this. I could picture all of that perfectly. And maybe it's better that I read this first, with the recon probably being hard to get through since there are no telesnaps and no footage, and it having to be done with production stills. Instead, my imagination is creating the image in my mind. What the Flyattractor, who's actually the person who sent me the novel, the Flyattractor, he sent me a lot of my Target novels. Been a huge supporter of the channel. He's also one of my patrons. Him and I are both really big on what we call the movie in our minds, or the movie in our heads. We use the terms interchangeably. Because my imagination is amazing, absolutely amazing. So I could picture everything that was going on without effort. And there's no way a BBC budget then or now could compete with my imagination. I really enjoyed this. Just both characters of the Abbot and the Doctor, how they're so different. Although it was easy for me to picture the Doctor playing the Abbot as well. I love the parts when he wants to burn the TARDIS, and he's going through his big speech about, we're gonna burn it, and I cast you out, demon. And I just picture Hartnell saying those lines and probably having a ball with it, and I absolutely loved it. And the interesting thing is that the Doctor and the Abbot don't actually meet or even see each other until the end of the story in the novel. They kind of finally run into each other right at the end. But other than that, they keep missing each other, which I really like, and probably made it easier on the actual production since you wasn't having to use a stand-in, really. And then Stephen and the Doctor are separated most of the story. So the story is alternating between all of these different characters. One, it's alternating between the Doctor and what he's doing, and Stephen and what Stephen is doing a lot of times with Anne. And I'll get back to Anne in a minute. But it's also alternating between other characters. There's these kind of French revolutionaries who are more Protestant. It's with what's going on with them. And then this one guy who is more Catholic, like Duval or something like that. Don't ask me to remember any of these French names. It's not going to happen. I mean, I can't even, I was reading it. I probably can't even pronounce most of those French names. And it's alternating what's happening with him as he's overthinking things. I like this guy because he is overthinking everything and reading things into stuff that's not there. Because he doesn't realize the Abbot and the Doctor are different people, and he keeps thinking he's running into the same person, and that the Abbot has this master plan going on that he doesn't, and that Stevens is right. It's really funny, actually, just all the stuff this guy puts together in his head. Very much comes across as one of those people who thinks he's a lot smarter than he is. I almost feel bad for the guy, the way it's written sometimes, because he just, at some points, he gets really confused. It's pretty funny. And then I'm not really familiar with the actual historics of this and the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. I don't really know that part of history. But apparently it was a massive slaughter, like 10,000 people killed in Paris, 50,000 people killed in France. A pretty big slaughter. And of course, since this is in the first Doctor's era, it's still that very much you can't change history, not one line. So the Doctor can't really do anything, almost like what we would call a fixed point now. It's another situation where they kind of have to get out of there. And as much as the Doctor might like to change things, the Doctor's not supposed to really change anything. Matter of fact, the novelization actually bookends the story with the Doctor being interviewed by the Time Lords centuries later. And it never says which Doctor. Like, it's probably not the first Doctor at this point. But it doesn't elaborate. It just kind of lets you fill in your own mind which Doctor it is. I pictured it as McCoy, actually, once I realized what was going on with the Time Lords, kind of saying, "We think you broke our rules, Doctor. Remember this?" And then the end of the story, it going back to that, and him managing to explain away all the little things that happen. And gotta admit, it's a little unconvincing, but but I liked it nonetheless. And obviously, that's something that's in the novel. The novel came out in like '87 after more lore had been established, like the actual Time Lords themselves. The interesting thing for me was the character of Anne, was it Chaplet, however you pronounce her last name? Now, I always, at least I had been fairly sure that the Massacre was Dodo's first story. I'm not a big fan of Dodo, to be honest, and her exit in the War Games is one of the worst companion departures. I just recently rewatched the War Games. But this whole time I'm seeing Anne Chaplet, and I'm like, I'm assuming that's Dodo is what I was doing through most of the story, because I just figured maybe Dodo was a nickname or a middle name, you know, something. They kept calling her Anne, but I just assumed that was Dodo. It wasn't until the end of the story I realized, okay, that's not actually Dodo. That's apparently like one of her ancestors, because the Doctor sends, in the novelization at least, the Doctor sends Anne and her family off to France to at least kind of protect them. Kind of like in the Fires of Pompeii, where he can't prevent the tragedy, but you know, just save someone, just save anyone, like he did with Capaldi's family in Fires of Pompeii. He is able to get Anne and her family out, and it's heavily hinted that Dodo is a descendant of hers, because when the Doctor is talking with the Time Lords later, and it's like, well, didn't you travel with a Dodo Chaplet? And he's like, well, maybe. Chaplet's a pretty common name. That's like Smith in the U.S. How should I know? And then it mentions how he's thinking in his mind that Dodo and Anne look exactly alike. How Dodo is the striking image of Anne. And I'm guessing in the serial, Jackie probably played both. I'm guessing she played Anne and Dodo. At least that's my assumption. So it's like the Doctor knows, but it's like he's pulling a Troughton and being like, I don't know. It comes together so well. I love how the Doctor, there's a couple times where he ends up in situations over his head, but he keeps his cool. He doesn't lose his temper. He waits it out. He gets incredulous a couple of times when he should. I love his reaction when he finds out they're going to burn the TARDIS, because the TARDIS gets found, and of course the abbot thinks it's an architect of the devil, and it's Satan, and they have to burn it out, so they set it on fire. And when they tell the Doctor, but they're going to set it on fire, the Doctor just starts laughing. He just starts laughing. He's like, oh, you silly little children. I love that. Of course, it's the TARDIS. The flames aren't going to hurt it at all, which they don't. I just love the fact that Doctor thinks it's hilarious. And I love the Abbot's reaction when they go back the next morning, and it's perfectly fine. Everything else is ashes, but the TARDIS is fine, and the Abbot's all indignant and blah, blah, blah. I'm laughing too much for a story that has very serious subject matter. I mean, you have assassination plots going on. You have two religious groups at a boiling point in France, which does hit that boiling point. You have a queen mother that, ooh, I bet she's blonde. There's a lot going on in this, a lot of action, which I'm sure we have duels going on, we have almost duels going on, we have witty banter going on, we have rivalries going on. Oh, it's so good. I really, really enjoyed this. And we have poor locksmith that is accused of being possessed by the devil. There's so much stuff going on. It's an adventure. This is another one, like, after I read it, immediately I was like, I wish this story existed. I wish at least one episode of this story existed, but I wish this story existed. Because if it is executed anywhere nearly as well on screen as it is in this book, and as it is in my imagination, it is a banger of a story. And I understand why now this story is regarded so fondly. I know the TV version is too, even though, again, apparently it's heavily rewritten. But I know, despite being missing it is regarded very well, and I can see why after reading this. It was just a really fun read. One of my favorite novelizations I've read so far, which I think when I do get around to watching the recon, because I do understand this is one they said would be very hard to animate, and I believe that. I think now that I have the context and the basic run of the story in my head, it's going to be a lot easier for me to follow what happens. But The Massacre, a fantastic read, a great novelization, loved all the stuff going on in it. Strong outing for the first Doctor. He gives a really good speech, which I don't know if it's the same speech in the TV version. I've always heard in episode 4 of the TV version, he gives a really good speech, like really good. But he also gives a speech in the novelization when he's pretending to be the abbot, when he talks about, you know, Catholics should not fight Catholics, but whatever the Protestants are calling themselves, it begins with an H. You know, they should not fight each other either. Catholics should not fight Protestant. Protestants should not fight Catholic. He gives this real speech about, you know, just be nice to each other, even though he knows history. He knows that's not going to happen. He knows the massacre is going to happen anyway. He still gives that really nice speech, and that speech in the novelization was a really cool speech, and I really liked it. And that Queen Mother, ooh, she's a piece of work. So The Massacre, the novelization. What do you think of it? Comment down below and let me know. What do you like better if you've read it and seen it, the novelization or the TV version? Which one do you think is better? Or do you just like both? Other things to do, don't forget to click the like button and the subscribe button. I also have a Patreon if you would like to support me on that. There is a link to that down in the description below. I also have a P.O. box if there's anything you would like to send me to look at and review. That's how I got this. That's how I got this and several other books that I'm looking forward to getting through. Special shout out to the Flyattractor for sending me those. I also have a Patreon if you want to support me on that. He's also one of my patrons. I want to give a shout out to some of my top tier patrons, Stephen Crane, Colin Coney, and Finn Perkins. I appreciate their support, as I do the support of all of my patrons. It's very much appreciated. I also have a link to my Amazon wish list down there, and a link to my Amazon UK wish list down there as well. I update those regularly. Most importantly, thank you for watching.